Hello, and welcome to The Connected Singer with Michael Hill and me, Julie Thompson. We're both singers and vocal coaches who love researching and learning new ways to keep in tip-top shape, vocally and mentally.
We know that being a performer is a hugely rewarding but also demanding career for mind, body and soul. And we want to help you find the balance you need to keep going on your musical journey. Each week, we'll be speaking to performers, teachers and expert practitioners in a range of fields.
From psychology to sports science to Reiki, who will share their knowledge and experiences to provide you with a toolkit of ways to keep well, beat performance anxiety,
avoid burnout and get the most enjoyment out of the pursuit we all love, singing.
Welcome once again to the Connected Singer podcast, everybody. We've just finished talking to Sam Carter, and it was another very interesting episode into the world of folk this time, and from someone that didn't anticipate initially going into that career. That's what I found quite interesting. I think when we first started talking, didn't we, Michael, we thought, we're going to ask him about, has it been this folk love all of your life? And he must have been sort of coming from a very sort of folk family or been in this culture since he was a tiny tot. And then as it transpired, it was something that he'd sort of grown a love for as a result of his environment and how his kind of musical journey led him to the folk world. I thought that was something really interesting because it kind of highlights that we should perhaps always remain open when we start a career in music or we start a musical journey, that to be open-minded and be willing to use music to connect with people and just see where it leads. That's what I took away from it. And also the fact that he was kind of humble about it, very open, very warm, just easygoing, easy to chat to. And yet he's had quite a high-profile sort of career in parts. Mm-hmm. So learning about that journey is really interesting. What I also loved, because this reminded me of conversations we've had in the past, that music in the community is really important, and that's what gave him the confidence to start singing and to actually start expressing himself vocally through this community spirit that we all often associate with the folk world, but that was something that gave him not just inspiration, but also that confidence to pursue a career in music, really.
Yeah, I suppose, with any community, of course, there's always ups and downs. So I don't want to say that it's just, this going perfect thing. But there is something really fantastic about the folk community in the fact that it comes from this long lineage of passing things down and sharing.
Yeah.
And that's really important. It's quite, in a weird way, although it's been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years, it's so refreshing nowadays, the way to work that way, to say, well, here's a tune, I'll teach you this tune. You sing it this way, I don't sing it that way, but you can do it this way, or listen to her version, and it's more about just the fact that it's people getting together and sharing. And even if you're writing new music, that's quite a nice way to find inspiration, is to think, what's going on around me? Can I get into the headspace of what that would be like? And in doing so, you then create something that feels real and authentic. And it's just more what we do. We get together and we say, did you hear about John the other week? He was in town and and that is what is passing forward. These fantastic stories, and there's nothing truer than, or what's the phrase about real life? You can't make it up. It's like a film. Some of these stories.
It's almost like a soap opera.
Yeah. It's just lovely to think that way, musically, to think, I'm not bound by, it has to be this and it has to be that. It's just tell stories.
Yeah, it's the storytelling element to it, isn't it? That I think was highlighted as a way to be creative and to be, as you say, inspired, but also alleviate some of the pressure of having to think about things that have happened in your life and feel that that's the only way that you can connect to a song, when clearly it isn't. For myself, if I've ever written stuff, it has been very personal. And sometimes that can create a block because you're too connected to it and you think you're going to expose yourself too much. Whereas you can talk really sensitively and really openly about a theme that perhaps isn't your story. And because it's not your story, you're able to do that.
Well, there's that, you know, a lot of great albums have happened in the wake of bad things, you know, breakups and disasters and, you know, whatever, tragedies, all that stuff. You know, we all love that music because it's real and it's authentic. But then I suppose you don't want your career to hinge on, you know, everything being rubbish all the time, because we'd all quite like to have a nice life. So what do you do? And I suppose what Sam's world, even for him as a writer as well, it's saying just be curious and interested in what other people are doing.
Yeah.
I could look out the window and look at what the neighbour's doing in the garden and think, I wonder why she does that, and then let my imagination run wild.
Yeah.
And I might end up with a story that's worth telling. It doesn't have to be exactly what happens, but it's just, you know, that window in the world and letting your imagination take over.
Yeah, and I think that's a really lovely thing to remember just in life in general, isn't it? Because we do talk about how much of a closed sort of society we've become because of technology, because we're constantly looking at our phones, we're communicating through our phones, and we forget to look up or to look out. And I think, you know, a lot of the old school songwriters were always kind of seen as these people that saw things that other people didn't see. You know, they always had this curious mind. But I think if we brought a little bit more of that into our life in general, I think we would gain that connection with people again. And as you say, trigger that imagination that perhaps we seek when we're looking through our phones or we're seeking, you know, through other mediums and things.
Yeah, and it's one of these, at the time of recording, because of this TV series, Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Kate Bush has had this #1 hit, which is wonderful. I love her, so I'm always happy to see her get recognition. But the music is moving this new generation, and they're like, "Oh, what's that about? You know, what's going on?" And oh, it's so passionate and powerful, and it is. But you ask, you know, there's been interviews. What's that about? What's the song about? Oh, well, I just imagined what would happen if the guy and the woman swap places.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It wasn't a real experience, but it was a real imagination. It was an authentic experience, and that channeling, what would that be like? And if I only could, I'd make a deal with God, I'd get him to swap our places. You know, that was the spark for the story. And you think, well, that creates amazing work. So we don't have to always hope that we'll have something to suffer about, you know.
Absolutely. And of course, everybody's perception is different of a situation because of our experiences. You know, we would perceive something very different to the next person. Yeah. So I think that's also something to take away from it, is that even if, and I guess this is going back to the folk world, these stories that they're talking about, these traditions and fairy tales or myths and all of these stories with different meanings, that someone's going to write about that, it's going to be very different to the next person. So you can still have the same story, if you like, but then create something new from it. And I think that also gets you into a creative flow, because that releases blockages, which, you know, we all get caught up in our head. Oh, I've got to be unique. Well, just, again, this unique theme, just be you and see the world as you through your eyes, and you will come up with a unique story and a unique interpretation. And I think that makes it so much easier, doesn't it? And we make things a little bit too difficult, I think, sometimes.
I was just laughing to myself because I thought someone's probably already thought of this, but I was thinking, shouldn't we all have, you know, that thought that the first letter of unique is you?
Brilliant. Patent it, Michael.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you know, I know I'm being a total cheeseball, but it's true that you only have to bring yourself into the mix. Yeah. Whether that's your imagination, your experience, your story, whatever it is, and then it becomes unique. I think we're all, maybe with the pressures of creating music nowadays, there's this constant stress about how can I separate myself from everyone else? Yeah. And it's easy to forget that, you know, we're maybe not seeing the wood for the trees, that, you know, we are all different, so that matters.
Absolutely. And that goes into every element of performance as well, doesn't it? Same with the voice, the way the voice sounds. You know, you can learn a specific technical way to sing things, but you'll still sound different from the next person that's doing it. And I think that's something that we should never forget, and just celebrate that more. I think celebrate that rather than thinking about how I can improve myself all the time. I think it's learning to celebrate who you are right now, and flow through life with that more.
And you know, if you haven't, just thinking, if you haven't seen, you know, this folk world in action, if it's not something that you've grown up with or come across, you know, go to something like Celtic Connections in Glasgow in January, or go to see Sam in concert, because it is this, or the after party. That's the thing you should go to, because that's when to see people doing this very communal, respectful thing of get up, do a song, next person gets up. You know, everybody just shares in this experience. It's just, it feels connected. You know, which is what our podcast is all about.
Oh, you're on fire today, Michael.
I know. Slogans, t-shirts, placemats, table, you know, covers. I'm selling them all today.
Get connected.
But it's just, I think we should all, you know, challenge ourselves and say, oh, I don't know much about that genre. I'm going to go and check it out and see what I can learn from it. And maybe they'll learn something from me, and we can all just find out from each other what it is that makes us love what we do, because that's ultimately, whether you're a metalcore singer or a folk singer or a pop singer, it's about the love of the music, and we can all respect that about each other, even if we don't really know it that well or know the genre, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's delve straight into the interview with Sam Carter, because it's definitely a world that is fascinating and also very inspiring. And remember, stay connected.
So we are so lucky to have a very talented and hardworking singer-songwriter and guitarist with us today. Originally from the part of the world that I grew up, in the Midlands, I bet you didn't know that. Wonderful far. He is a highly acclaimed instrumentalist, particularly renowned for his English fingerpicking style. He has won awards such as the BBC Folk Award, appeared on national radio and TV, including shows such as Later with Jools Holland, toured the world, and has had 7 releases to date. His most recent being Home Waters and Home Waters Live, which is just beautiful. I've had listened to that already. And he is currently touring with that. So we are delighted to have the pleasure to talk to this incredible talent about his musical and vocal journey. So please welcome the wonderful Sam Carter. Woo!
Hello. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's great to see you. Thank you for being here and taking the time in your busy schedule.
Not a problem at all. Pleasure.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think we need a sort of audience clap sound effect, don't we? Because otherwise it's like, and the sound of one hand clapping. It's very zen.
I'm into that. That's good.
Yeah. So I guess to start, it'd be great to hear about how you became a full-time folk musician. And I guess, was it your first love? Is it your one and only love? Or was there like an electro beatboxing background that we don't know about? How did you get to where you are now?
Well, that's a good question. I can't remember a time when I didn't sing or want to sing, and pretty much can't remember a time when I didn't play guitar. I think I started when I was really young, maybe 8. I think I started playing guitar, and my dad played classical guitar when I was young. And there was a guitar in the house, so at some point I picked it up, and I think I already, I sort of figured out how to play a few chords, and my dad said to me, "Hey, you should go and get some lessons." I went, "Oh, all right." And so I started on a journey of guitar. That was my first, and still is my main kind of sort of formal training route in music, is through the guitar, So I played in various bands as I was growing up, and I got more into electric stuff actually. So in my teens and my early 20s, I played in sort of various sort of grunge and rock bands and so on. And I still love electric or loud music. I love loud music. I've made some louder albums as well. still a part of what I do. But at some point in my when I finished uni, which would have been when I was 21, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But the only thing I really knew what to do well, and the thing that I loved doing, was playing music. And I thought to myself, well, if that's what I want to do, I'm going to try and do something with it. At the time I had, I'd written a few songs, and I'd sort of got, some skills together on guitar and stuff like that. But I didn't really have very much going for me other than that. So one day over that summer, after I'd finished uni, my friend phoned me up, and he'd moved to London. He lived in Chalk Farm, and his friend had moved out of the flat and paid the rent and just left it for a month. And he said, well, if you want to come down to London for a month and see how you get on. I can remember this really miserable summer where I was reading through The Guardian ad jobs and going, oh, you can be a graduate tea taster was actually the most fun sounding one that I thought I could probably get on with. And the rest of them, I don't even know what this job means. And so I thought, well, yes, I'm going to take my friend up on this offer to go to London, and in that completely naive way of like, oh, that's how everything works out. You just go to London.
I remember that well. And I resisted that, actually. I was like, no, I'm not going to.
Very smart. Very smart. Very smart. Yeah. So I did that. I made that move to London, and then off the back of that, I started playing solo gigs because I didn't know anybody at the time. So it made sense for me to be playing solo, and because I could accompany myself with guitar, I sort of gravitated towards that, and I'd always loved that sound, whether it was blues musicians or folk musicians, or kind of pop singer-songwriters. I'd always loved that delivery of one voice and then one instrument, and I thought that it's such an expressive and kind of intimate way to deliver a song. And so it kind of became my thing. I started going out and meeting other musicians a little bit and doing open mic nights and so on. And gradually things started to sort of pick up from there. I kind of started to meet other musicians to work with. I sort of found that there was this sort of folk and acoustic scene in London. And at the same time, that was where my listening was kind of going. I was sort of getting into people like John Martin and Nick Drake, and then gravitated more towards sort of more traditional English singers like Martin Carthy and Nick Jones and Martin Simpson, people like that. So it kind of slowly evolved towards the sort of sound that I make now. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and said, I'm going to do this. It just kind of slowly evolved over time. Yeah. I mean, I could go on, but that's quite a long answer already. So.
Just a quick break to remind you that we have more info on Sam's music activity in the info below. As we shall soon hear, Sam loves the music community and is often collaborating with other fantastic musicians. So please take a look and perhaps even follow him on social media. He's often playing live or featuring somewhere or other. You may even learn about some new exciting music or artists. But first, let's continue with the conversation as Sam really opens up about the challenges he has experienced as a singer that many singers face and how he personally overcame them, which I think we could all learn from. So let's dive in.
The Connected Singer. Do you think that maybe sort of a sense of a place can influence your music? You built your career or started to move in a direction because you'd moved to London, obviously, and that just seemed to be the musicians perhaps you were working with. And as you say, the folk scene kind of lends itself really well to sort of solo artists, doesn't it? And open mic nights and things. It's, if you're going to go with the grunge route, then you need a band, don't you?
Yeah.
And that can be difficult sometimes to find those people who are on the same page. But do you think there were any influences from the Midlands as well? That there are any sort of styles from the Midlands that have influenced your folk music, do you think?
That's a really interesting question, because the Midlands is, for some reason, not many traditional songs and tunes were collected in the Midlands. And, the coast down south, pretty much everywhere else on the country, there's loads of stuff, but the collectors just didn't bother with the Midlands. I'm vehemently opposed to the idea that it's just that we didn't have any good songs. I think it's more that the collectors couldn't be bothered to go up that far from London. They went to Hampshire and places cold. Like that, but yeah, they didn't go to the Midlands. It just seemed a bit drab, and they didn't bother. So it wasn't really that. But for me, personally, I grew up with, my parents are avid church goers. And so I grew up in that world when I was really young, and my parents used to take me to church. And so that was where I heard people singing, and first, in real life. And it was always this thing. And now looking back, it was like, oh, that's not something everybody had, but it was just people sing. It didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter. You didn't have to have a great voice. You didn't have to be on stage. It's just people sang. That's what people do. They get together and they sing as part of their what they do. So when it came to the folk scene, it's like, oh yeah, people just sing. It didn't seem odd to me. I think some people it's like, how did you get into folk music? It's like, well, because it has this thing of being rooted in community singing, and this world where the performer and the audience are not divided off from each other in the same way that they are in pop and rock, where we kind of have these artists up on a pedestal, and then we have these consumers, if you like, in the audience who listen to these experts do their thing. And I'm not against any of that. I love rock stars and all the rest of it. I'm totally into that. But the ethos of folk music from that point of view seemed completely natural to me, from having come from that church background, which so that part of that world I carried on with me. That theologically, it's not where I've ended up. Let's just say that. But that kind of ethos of everybody gets together to sing and in a community really resonated with me, and I really value that about folk music, that it's fine for everybody to sing, and it doesn't, yes, there are great performers out there and people go and congregate specifically to see these great singers, but also people just sing, and that's great. I absolutely love that. And it's interesting actually, because we had an interview with an Australian professor, Dr. Kenny, and she was talking about how important community music is, especially for musicians that want to sustain a career in music, because this well, first of all, you're giving back to the community, and giving is also something that's very fulfilling, isn't it? It also takes the pressure away from you. I think it also makes music more accessible. And as you say, there's nothing wrong with putting, the stars on a pedestal, and there's always going to be very, very famous people. But this can be a lot of pressure, can't it? Because you feel that you have to prove yourself all the time, or compete with those that are in your field in order to be the best. And I think this can be really draining, especially of your confidence. And I think we forget to remember the joy that it gives to others as well as ourselves, and remember why exactly we decided to make music in the first place. And usually it's to express ourselves or to connect with others. Absolutely. And perhaps if we were encouraged to focus more on how singing enhances our community in so many ways, we would have less cases of anxiety and also issues such as imposter syndrome that we see and we hear about a lot these days. Yeah. And I get that too. I have imposter syndrome all the time. I'm very sort of, every time you get on a stage, you kind of, with a guitar or to sing, you think about all the amazing people that have done that over the years and are still doing it now. And you kind of think, hang on a minute, can I really do this? Do I deserve to be doing this? All that kind of stuff. Yeah. I think that's very common. But also I think stemming from, as I was saying, my kind of background in that kind of church world a little bit, and then folk, community singing, I'm going to call it rough. Yeah. I also have a sense of like, no, it's fine for me to sing because it's fine for you to sing, and it's fine for all of us to sing, So that gives me a bit of confidence to get on stage and think I don't have to have the best voice ever. I just have to have something to say that resonates with people, whether through my lyrics or through the way I sing, because that's really what people are there to get, I think, from music, is a sense of connection, that sense of, I recognize something about that. And it's I've been in that place. People like to relate to the stuff that they're hearing. And sometimes also music offers obviously escapism, and we think of David Bowie or somebody like that, and this kind of fantastical sort of figure that we sort of takes us into another world, and that is also an aspect of music, obviously. But I think in folk in particular, for me it's about a kind of resonance, and it's about, So that's the thing that gives me confidence to go past the imposter syndrome and think, who do you think you are? So, well, I'm somebody, and people are basically all made of the same stuff. And if I express as best I can what this song means to me, then other people will hear something in that, and that will be a valuable experience for people. And this is all getting a bit heavy, but that's kind of how I think about it, and that's how I get past that feeling of like, who do you think you are, getting up on stage the same as whoever it is has, and all that. So
but there are a lot of musicians. There are a lot of us out there, though, aren't there? So I mean, there's a lot of people making music, and
absolutely brilliant people,
and absolutely, fantastic, very talented people, and there's the stadium experience that we all quite like, but there's also that intimate gig that we like as well. And as a listener, we like to be able to connect with musicians on a slightly more intimate level. So, we don't always want to, be one in hundreds of thousands of people and that person be a spot on the stage. It can be an euphoric experience sometimes being in a stadium, but you get to really hear the cracks in the voice or the expression being in a small environment, and people want that experience as well, or just to go to the local pub and listen to some live music, spontaneously, and that's why there'll always be jobs for us out there on whatever level it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's music that suits, I mean, this is an obvious point really, but not some styles of music are suited to venues better than, some venues rather than other venues. So for example, I'm also in a band called False Lights, which is a folk rock band with 6 people in it making a lot of noise. And that's not a very good fit for a small arts centre kind of folk club type gig, but for a festival it's great, and we jump up and down and we kind of get the audience singing along, and that has a certain vibe to it that suits that venue. But for sort of smaller venues and art centres and folk clubs and that kind of thing, that sort of world, small theatres, I don't think you can really beat that one performer and one voice kind of thing. I don't know. That's just my interest, but it's,
Totally agree. And I think it's inspiration as well for other musicians to be able to see people working in that environment. As you say, it allows people to sort of say, I want to get up and do that, and why not? And and also what I was thinking as you were talking is that we all need practice. As singers, we need to be on stage as often as possible in order to get better. So everyone's got to start somewhere, and if you can sort of show that it's okay to go up there. And Sam, your voice is very pure and it sounds very well trained, actually.
That's crazy, because I have not, really trained it. So.
Which is a question we were going to ask you, wasn't it, Michael? But it's good to hear those cracks, or like to see that it's driven from an emotional sort of expressive place rather than trying to be perfect.
Oh, well, thank you. That's really nice to hear. Thank you. It's very kind.
It's interesting you said about, the lack of collation of stories, or songs from the Midlands, because I suppose certainly in the 20th century, the Midlands made up for it big style. You had everybody. You had Black Sabbath and Slade and all these people, like all these big bands. And it's interesting with folk that there's an element of kind of channeling, the past. To me, like thinking about my own upbringing, this idea that you are sort of you become like a tradition bearer. But when you're writing, new music, is there any of that, when you're writing, that there's a sort of resonance of the past or something? Because, as you say, there's probably not like a direct bouncing off point from here's a tune from, Rutland from 1860 or whatever. But is there still something that can be taken or learned or passed on from that time into new music?
I think absolutely, and for me, it's happened in lots of different ways. I mean, it's funny that you should say that, because I have taken traditional tunes from a couple of 100 years ago and written new lyrics to them and made them about something a bit more contemporary. You know, I have actually sort of, directly taken something and done that with. I wrote a song called Dreams Are Made of Money, which came from an old hymn. And the chorus was originally Glory Hallelujah, and it's Dreams Are Made of Money now, at least in my version. And that came from an American shape note hymn, which is another whole thing that I'm kind of into, but it's a traditional folk kind of melody originally. But I think also in terms of the storytelling and the way that it works in let's say ballads, so traditional songs that tell stories, I've learned a lot from the pacing of those songs, and also things like telling the story in third person, so telling a story about different people, I mean, that happens in pop music as well. You'd think like Daniel by Elton John or something like that. It's not like it only happens in folk music, but storytelling is definitely something that, or Eleanor Rigby, for example. But so everything comes out. A lot of stuff comes out of that sort of folk tradition, and I feel okay writing a song with like 4 or 5 verses of the same tune if I want to do that. I think that comes out of my folk roots, I think, and maybe in the pop scene, it's probably frowned upon, but I like the development that you can get from allowing the song to have a bit more space, and I think there's something kind of magical that happens when you have that repetition as well. This is maybe a bit of an aside, but I think what happens is people stop listening to the tune because they realize that it's the same over and over again. And they really pay attention to the lyrics because there's nothing changing in the maybe necessarily in the tune or the music. So they really focus in on the lyrics. And I think I've sort of picked up, that's something I've picked up from traditional music, is really the emphasis on the stories and in the lyrics. I mean, there's some beautiful tunes as well, but that's definitely something that I've done. And also the kinds of things that traditional songs are about, which is, love and loss, and a lot of things about migration and people being displaced. And, it's like, well, how many of these topics aren't relevant anymore?
Yeah, exactly.
And so,
yeah,
I really think it has a lot to offer,
Yeah. It creates an awareness again of these topics. As you say, they're very relevant, but it's offering a different perspective, and it's in the sort of safety of musical context, isn't it? And as you say, if you're the storyteller, even if you've written it, it kind of removes you from that. If you wanted to be not disconnected from the emotion, but kind of what you're actually saying, you can be. You can be somebody that's kind of just putting it out there for people to then ponder on and reflect on, without it actually being maybe something that you feel deeply about. You might, but I was just thinking about the sort of imposter syndrome and also connections to stage fright and those kind of things.
Yeah, that's interesting. It
kind of allows you to have a little bit of distance and not feel personally attacked should you not get the response that you want.
That's really interesting. You said that, and it's kind of jogged me to think, to kind of talk about the idea that it is that being able to sing something as really a character, an actor, as when you sing traditional songs, I have a song, Oh, My Name Is Jack Hall, Chimney Sweep, Chimney Sweep. Now, obviously, that's not autobiographical. I haven't been in Chimney Sweep, but this guy the guy in that song is a rebel. He's kind of got a lot of, he's not messing about. He's kind of robbed people. He's been out, he's a proper, kind of hard nut, really, I guess. And so, you can sort of get into that. You can get into the spirit of it when you sing it. And he gets hanged at the end. He's this kind of defiant sort of character. So when I'm singing that song, I'm trying to embody who I think that guy is, that character is. But when I'd heard people sing traditional songs more, I realized that I could do that with my own original writing, that I could choose to write about something or as somebody else. And as long as there's truth within the story of that, in a way that resonates for people, if I can write it in the right way, then people are going to go with it. And so I've written songs about divorce, and I haven't even been married yet, and I've had people come up to me at the end. I have this song called The One, which is on the No Testament. It's kind of about, it's a bit like Father and Son by Cat Stevens, but a lot more miserable than that. And at the end of the gig, I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your divorce. That's really awful what you've been through," and it's like, no, that, I've written that. And I feel that's, I don't feel there's anything disingenuous about that. I feel like that is a legitimate part of, I mean, I've a relatively small kind of straightforward, experience of the world that's like a lot of other people's experience of the world. And so I'm going to run out of stuff to write about at some point. I'm not like endlessly interesting. So the idea that I can just grab some stories that I've, some things I can see happening in my friends' worlds or stories that I've read and then they've kind of been reimagined in my mind or I've seen something on TV that's inspired me or whatever. The idea that I can assume a voice, if you like, and step into somebody else's shoes and write a song from that point of view means that I have so much more material, more freedom to kind of say something. And so there's a song on Home Waters called Surprise View, which is about, I'll tell you how that came about, because I guess it kind of illustrates the point, is that I'd had a couple of people close to me who had, lost people close to them. And it kind of got me down, and I felt, obviously, it was really heavy to see people go through that. And one day when I was out walking in the Peak District, which is where I live in Sheffield now, so the Peaks is kind of the place I go to get some headspace. I'd gone walking in the Peaks, and these characters popped into my head, and it was a guy and his wife, and they're avid walkers, both of them, and the guy. She sadly passes away, and the guy every year goes back to Surprise View, which is a viewpoint in the Peaks where you can see over the Hope Valley, which couldn't be more poetically named if it tried, And it's a song about grief, and it's a song about that need to kind of still find somebody, to locate somebody, to kind of go back somewhere where you can sort of commune with somebody, even when they're not there, a special place that you remember them in, and that's what the song's about, But I didn't personally go through that, and those people are fictional, but I know when I sing that song that it has a resonance, because that's a very relatable kind of story, and that is, for me, that's where the inspiration of the folk music has come through my writing. I think is that when I sit and listen to a traditional singer sing about something that I can't have possibly heard of or been involved in, but it's hundreds of years ago, but it's a song about love and loss or treachery or lies or adultery or whatever it is, affairs or whatever. I get it. I get that, and I can be absorbed in that, and I'm not thinking, oh yeah, but but you weren't there, and then I realised that, of course, I don't think that. So I can do that as a singer too. I can have my pick of things that I want to write about. I have some freedom to do stuff with that, and I don't have to always be me. I don't have to always be in the first person and literally be singing about stuff that's going on in my life. Yet at the same time, it's kind of hard to avoid stuff that resonates with you personally, because I chose that song that subject for a reason, and I stuck at it long enough to finish the song. So anyway, but that's to come back to your point. Yes, there is again, in terms of sort of stage fright or performance anxiety or things like that, I find that when I'm singing a song, I'm trying to embody the character that I'm singing in. Even if I'm singing in the first person and it is about me, it's still very often just an aspect of me, and not, me in my entirety. So there is a bit of a separation in my head, between those. And I try to really embody, I'm sure like all great singers do, just to try and like really be in the song and really give people the song and try and get out of the way a little bit. Personally,
I think that's really fascinating, actually, because it speaks to, in a way, what some of the stuff that we might do with singers, in terms of interpreting songs. There's a sort of like a belief that you have to be completely authentic. It has to be only you, pouring your guts out in order to be relatable and to be a proper singer. But if we take advice from the world of other worlds of performing, like acting, you know, there are many schools of thought that it's about this. You make the image so clear in your mind, the story, that when you do it, it does feel real. But you still have this helpful kind of separation in a way, so that you can do, you know, 8 shows a week or something, or whatever that person might be doing, and not feeling like it's just every night is a trauma of some sort, you know. And if you've had you know, like you said, it made me think of someone like Kate Bush, who, you know, she invents stories about the most kind of marvelous and funny things, like, oh, what would it be like if I was one of the clothes in the washing machine? Or what if I was a soul that was connected to another person, and we keep meeting at different points in the world? I mean, it's kind of fantastical, but if she's in it, if the imagination takes you there, then it can feel really something you can connect to, and I think that's really powerful.
I think,
I agree.
Yeah, and I think we've all had these emotions. So even if you're sort of saying, yeah, I've never been in that situation before, you know, we've all watched TV, we've heard stories, we've got friends that may be going through it. Especially if we do watch things, watch films or read books, we go on that journey with someone, and those emotions are evoked by the story and the images that we create in our heads. And that in itself is enough, I think, to be able to then present that and perform that and deliver that in a way that's authentic, because there's still a connection there. And I think, as you were saying, it's then down to you to decide how much of a connection you want that when you're performing, to keep that distance. Or it might be that you connect more deeply when you're in the studio, because you can then go and have a cry. You know, whereas on stage, it's like, no, I decide not to like connect so deeply with it. It's interesting. And as you say, I don't think there's too many differences. I mean, I'm not a folkie, so, you know, I've only spoken to some folk singers, and I have listened to folk music, and my guitar teacher also got me to sing some stuff when I was younger. So I've had a little bit of some experience. I don't know the historical, and I'm not deeply informed, but I think there are some parallels, because as you say, especially if you want a long career, you've got to find other things to talk about. You perhaps don't always want to have to go into an emotion just to write a song, like Adele. She always has to have a breakup, you know, to write all this. It's hard. It's like, do you want to have to go to that place every time you want to write something? It's fine, and people resonate with that and connect with that, but that's quite hard on the artist. But we were talking to Charlie Barnes, and he was talking about Dan. He works with Bastille. Well, I didn't realise, and they're very pop now, I think. You know, they sort of started off indie and gone very pop. So he doesn't write about stories or experiences that he's had. He writes about films and TV shows and stuff. So even if we're not aware of it in the pop, it's there. You know, people are writing about these things. So there are parallels, I think. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I mean, for me, that must happen, because, as you said, you know, you're going to run out of material so quickly if you can't explore other realms, if you like, of not just your own experience, definitely. But I think it comes down to the same thing. It comes down to, if we're watching acting and it's not working, you know, we don't say, oh, this isn't working because they're playing a part from somebody whose life they've definitely not done that in real life. It's because it's not believable. They're not believable in the part, and we're not going with them. So that believability, that's hard, I think. I'm not entirely sure how, you know, for example, you see one band and they're doing, don't know, a blues thing, and you're totally in it, it's totally authentic, and they're absolutely pulling it off. And there's another band that's doing it, and it's like, you know, it's not quite happening. And I think it's very subtle. I mean, it has to do with the style and the music and all the rest of it. But there's something about believability. As long as it's believable, it doesn't have to be true. Does that make sense? It doesn't have to be literally your truth, you know. Because we want to go and see, if you can nail, I don't know, a Queen song, then, and you're believable being Freddie Mercury, then that's awesome. You don't have to write your own songs even, do you? So
no.
Or even if it's believable escapism. I mean, think of the number of people, you know, back in the day from places like, you know, the north of England or Scotland, who were really, really into things like glam rock, like, you know, Roxy Music and David Bowie. And I think it's part of it, because it was before my time, but I really loved it when I was growing up. And I think it was partly this idea of these images it created. You know, you could be in Acapulco, or you could be kind of on a spaceship going to, you know, wherever. It was so kind of well presented that it took you away from wherever you were.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess you could be at a folk gig and travel back in time or travel forwards in time if the story is true enough for you as the listener. Yeah,
absolutely. That's always the hope, I guess.
Very philosophical. I like this.
Very philosophical, yeah.
The Connected Singer.
And just like that, we've come to the end of part 1 with Sam. Part 2 should be sitting patiently in line for you to jump straight on, or at least will be available in a day or 2. It's definitely a must listen, as Sam will be speaking very honestly and openly about performance anxiety and self-doubt. He also shares with us how he harmonises the connection between his mind and body. It's actually given us some inspiration for some new guests. Don't forget, we also do have a community growing in our Facebook group where you can engage with us or other like-minded singers, ask questions, and find more tips and tools on singing-related topics. And I often post the odd live video in there, just updating everybody with what's going on. So I really hope to see you there. Bye for now.
The Connected Singer.